Just a quick question first. Hi, Cindy. You mentioned, that the criteria has to be, a net ratepayer benefit. Has Pacific Corp take that down any more granular and looked at it from a state by state? So, do you want every state to benefit, or how is that philosophy shaping, or is it shaped yet?
Yeah, I think the answer is simple. It has to be by state, because that's the threshold that we have to meet to get regulatory approval, assuming everything else works out.
Okay. The Infrastructure Authority, we started in 2004, and over the years, we've had various attempts to suggest transmission projects that go to California and from Wyoming, whether I can remember the Frontier Line. I don't know if you remember that pain and suffering. All that kind of came out of the RMAT study, which was a big thing that Pacific Corp was involved in. And it seems like the fundamental shift in California's idea of, maybe opening up the transmission really is predicated on the Clean Power Plan coming into effect, because at that point, sort of federally, from a federal perspective, all generation is going to get dispatched on environmental attributes. And so maybe, I guess I'm just wondering from your perspective, is that something that you think is, will California really accept Wyoming transmission lines into California absent the Clean Power Plan?
I think the answer is, for California, this is not about the Clean Power Plan, because they don't care about the Clean Power Plan. They care about their energy policy, and they're headed to 50%, whether there's a Clean Power Plan or not, right? And so that's the one thing about California. They really don't care what the rest of the country does. They set their own energy policy. So I don't see a connection to Clean Power Plan for California. What I think, and will they take transmission to bring in renewables from outside the state? They say they will. Like on any issue, you have proponents and opponents, right? And they're dealing with that within the state. But the numbers are staggering on the impact to their ratepayers, to their consumers, if they don't.
Is the criteria, you said it was like not 345, but the voltage?
300
300, yeah. Are they putting any caveats, whether it's DC or AC?
No. So I think, Gateway and Transwest Express, and before that we had Frontier and a few others, those are about expanding transmission capacity to be able to export more power out of Wyoming, right? Wyoming is a major exporter of power today. I think the first obstacle with both of those is permits. Rod Fisher from our company is here, heads up our Gateway programs, trying to get the permitting, and we're 8 years into it, Rod? And, it's anybody's guess if you can even get them permitted, number one. And so I think if you get past that threshold issue, they don't get built if there isn't a resource on one end and a customer on the other end. Fundamentals. And so whether that customer is in Wyoming, the customer is in Utah, the customer is in Nevada, Arizona, all the way to California, is way down the road to understand where and when that will occur. But I think that, Gateway, these things are so long lead that you have to be looking 20 years into the future for expansion, load growth, those types of things in order to get started on these things. So from that standpoint, I think we got to get permits before we can worry about if anything's going to get built. There are no other vertically integrated utilities. There are some independent transmission companies that have joined, And they tend to have like one project, that type of thing. But no large vertically integrated utility that's got transmission systems, no. And that's because there is no regional ISO. I drew the short straw again. What it can tell you is there's no formal proceedings going on with FERC because it's premature. The other thing I can tell you is Pat Wrighton, our president and CEO of Pacific Corp Transmission, was just in Washington, D.C. last week, meeting with FERC, and we have been meeting with them along the way. Our message to them is that a regional ISO has to be independent, but with FERC, it's really about, it can't just be a cookie cutter from the east, right? Because to me, that's the risk with FERC. They think everything should just be the same. And we know in the West, so much is different than in the East. And so our message around that is they are going to have to be flexible and realize some structures that work in the other RTOs or ISOs may not make sense in the West because of the regional diversity and different variety of things that we have that are different. So we're having the dialogue. At the end of the day, FERC's like any federal agency. They are not going to commit to anything until you have a filing in front of them. And so each one of these items, like the transmission access charge, the resource adequacy rules, each one of those are tariff and rule design, and each one of those have to go through a FERC approval process. And so I think that's a challenge in and of itself. I'd say for Pacific Corp, the grid management charge is one that's a big concern to us. All of them are concerns, but I'd say the grid management charge is a huge concern to us because FERC tends to look from a non-discriminatory statute perspective. And if you literally apply that to the grid management charge, then anybody that joins, the allocation just changes, right? And that would mean a huge cost shift from current participants to Pacific Corp. And that's a deal breaker. And so getting over that threshold with FERC, in my perspective, and keep in mind I'm not the one running our regional ISO efforts, but in my perspective, that could be a heavy lift at FERC.
I think I have a question for Bill because of what was on his slides, but I don't know if I can penetrate his force field. So I was wondering, Bill, so in your presentation, you talked about California's interest to export electricity, so where they've been predominantly an importer. So with all the current transmission projects currently planned and the technologies, whether it's AC or high voltage DC, if they are going to evolve into a significant exporter, how might that change the design and the technology selection for those transmission projects? Would a one-directional high voltage DC no longer be a viable decision for certain transmission projects?
That is a good question.
For you?
A lot of that is unknown, I think, at this time. There's a likelihood that if they go forward with this, that a lot of the new generation might still come from within California for one reason, and that is there are forces acting against the people in the ISO right now and those who want to go regional, and they are primarily labor unions within California. It costs a lot more to build solar plants, wind plants, and any kind of plants in California than it does outside the borders. And so a lot of people are thinking of importing more energy from Wyoming, from New Mexico, et cetera, because it's cheaper. But the labor unions are strong, and labor unions talk to their representatives, and that could turn the whole thing upside down one way or the other. And so figuring out how the transmission is going to play into all of that almost has to be looked at, I think, after we figure out what the model is going to look like. And so I'm afraid I don't have a really clear answer for that right now.
I would say from the process, I think Bill was spot on. The way SB 350 is written today, it's absolutely unacceptable. It's going to produce an unacceptable outcome. And I think that, fundamentally, the leadership in the state of California has to realize that energy policy is set by the state, and that ISOs are about managing the grid and the markets. And the people that you hold accountable for complying with your energy policy isn't the ISO. It's the entities in the state that are serving the customers, right? And I know I'm on the hook to comply with all laws, rules, regulations in every single state we do business. And I would never shun that responsibility and think some other entity had that responsibility for me. So when we think about the governance, how do we shape it? I met with the governor, I don't know, Rita, was it last week? And I talked to Bill about it. I think the governors have to get in a room. And I think it has to be made very clear that SB 350 in its current form is unacceptable, and the cards are stacked to not produce a fully independent ISO structure. And if they can't get there as governors, there's no way it's going to happen in the process.
Yeah, part of your question was how is the process going to go and how can it be changed? Other ISOs and RTOs, first of all, are apolitical. They're not tied to the statutes of any one state within their footprint. This one, the way this one would be born is a little bit different because it's starting as a political ISO. But the other ISOs and RTOs were formed by having transmission operators and other industry people get together and form an operating agreement among themselves with no tie to the states. That is what's different about this model. And how can we fix that? First, I'll tell you that the ISO themselves are not necessarily the problem here. I've had several conversations with people within the ISO. They're subject to the same California statutes that have been passed that Pacific Corp is, that we will be. And they are not unwilling to talk about different models. But there's the elephant in the room, and that's the California legislature. I had actually a little more confidence in having some fairly rapid movement in the model before I read that letter of February 3rd of this year. That speaks volumes as to where, at least where the senior leadership in the California legislature wants to go. I don't think, and I think Cindy talked about this earlier, I don't think we're going to get very far by that June 6th deadline where the ISO is going to make its report to the joint commission and then off to the governor. There's a lot of work to be done, and it is, I believe, at a higher level to solve the problem than anyone sitting in this room, and I agree with Cindy about getting the governors in a room and seeing who walks out standing.
Anything else?
Thank you very much.